Our Torah thought for the week is about revisiting the calendar, both the solar architectures of 360 and 364. Okay? So as I think is pretty evident throughout this parsha, anytime we get into a detailed discussion of tabernacle items, priestly designs, calendar math is a huge part of it. We've been going through it quite carefully for the past month or so. There are snippets of that math all over this part of Leviticus and at the end of Exodus. So I thought it might be helpful to show a big picture approach with the rules that govern the Eternal Torah calendar's Hebrew solar years. There's also the other reason why we're doing this is because we had a fairly beautiful alignment between vernal equinox and new moon that just happened this month. So, could not be more current. Over the past several months, I've been focusing on certain aspects of these different types of solar years. So I'm going to try to tie all those different strands together in a way that hopefully makes sense. One proviso before I get into this, I've emphasized some concepts and greatly downplayed others in the past to keep this to a manageable length and for the sake of clarity. So if something sounds different from what you heard me say before, go with the wording I am giving you now over what you may remember me saying. Our tour into the fuller picture of the Eternal Torah calendar and the Hebrew solar years starts now. Our first step, we need to go back to Adam, okay? We need to understand the knowledge that Adam had and the circumstances behind that knowledge. When Adam was created, he was a fully adult male. So he literally had no childhood, no mentoring, no family socialization, no training in anything from anyone ever. And yet, Adam was tasked with tending the Garden of Eden, naming all the animals, and a variety of other tasks. How will Adam do this without experience and without other humans to help him? My answer is that Father Yah preloaded, or downloaded if you prefer, all the sophisticated agricultural, astronomical, and mathematical understanding that Adam would ever need. Not only was Adam given the rules and procedures behind an amazing and perfect calendar system for his own use, he was also given information on all the future iterations, or if you like to think in software terms, rollouts, right? Version rollouts for future generations. So that this group would get this part, then the following group would get another part, so on. And pass that down the ages. As a result, while Adam did not use either solar or lunar months, for example, he did know what they were. And he knew that by the 10th generation, Noah, solar months would come into the calendar, and that by the 26th generation, which is Moshe, lunar months would be used to count to the feasts. So that's step one. Adam learns from Father Yah directly how to track the seasons. Step two is to understand the four components of the calendar that are given in Genesis 1. Signs, seasons, days, and years. In that order, always. So next we turn to the first official calendar instructions in the Torah, Genesis 1, verse 14 through 19. And Elohim said, "Let lights come to be in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, or appointed times, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it came to be so. And Elohim made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And Elohim set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good. And there came to be evening, and there came to be morning, the fourth day. So keeping this at a very basic and hopefully non-controversial level, let's look at a few facts. Signs must come before seasons count time. Seasons tell us when to count days. Days will count to the end of that year. And when you run out of the days in the year, you wait for next year's signs to come to tell you to begin the count again. So you will have a period between after the old year ended, but before the new year starts, which is called between the years. Okay? Second point, the signs mentioned here are the greater light to rule the day, which is the sun. See Psalm 136, verse 8, Jeremiah 31, 35. And the lesser light to rule the night, which is the moon, Psalm 136, verse 9. And the stars, which, along with these others, mark time and give light to the earth. 3. The signs are given a particular hierarchy and importance. In general terms, sky signs outrank earth signs. Job 38:32. But to get more specific, there's a pecking order of these signs and so on. It's given in Revelation 12:1 through 2, where the vision of the woman begins top to bottom with a crown of 12 stars above her head, followed by her being clothed in the sun. Then the moon is at her feet, and the earth, of course, must be below the moon. That gives us the hierarchy of stars, sun, moon, and earth. So this means, for example, that barley is the secondary effect of spring, not the cause of spring, and not the cause to start the calendar. The barley does what it does because the sun commands it to do it. It's the sun that sets the year. Next, dealing with seasons, there are two words for this concept in Hebrew. The first is moed, which plural of which is for feasts, moedim, and the second is this word eth. In many cases, these terms are identical, but they do have some critical differences between them as well. The first is that moed can refer to feasts that are attached to the agricultural year, as well as the time of the year that a feast takes place. Whereas eth only refers to the agricultural milestones, but not the feasts that are attached to those milestones. So for example, Passover, Pesach, is the barley harvest, right? That's what it is. Shavuot is, the end of barley and the start of the wheat, right? So you can mark it either way. The difference is that moed refers to the particular name of the feast, whereas the eth refers to the time of year in which the feast takes place. So for example, when Abraham is visited by a divine messenger and says, at this time, eth, next year, your wife Sarah will embrace a son. That means whatever season you're in now, Abraham, wait for it to turn to that part of the season next year, and that's when Sarah will have a son. Okay? So you can read about this, Genesis 17:21, Leviticus 23, verse 4, and Deuteronomy 11, verse 14. The other thing is, and this might be a little difficult to immediately get, okay? This took me years to get. But moed, the feasts, are under the control of the sun, while the eth cycles that contain the feasts are determined by the stars. It is the stars that bring out the seasons. Now for that, you can look at Job 31 through 33. As for days, they are ordered from sunset to sunset. For the earliest parts of the 360-day per year system, we count whole days. But for the earliest part of the 364-day solar year, we group those days into groups of 7, or weeks. It's also important to note that the week is not mentioned in Genesis 1:14 through 19, which we just read, because the week was ordered as a fixed count from the first Shabbat of creation week, Genesis 2, verse 2 through 3. Because the week is 1 to 7 and back to 1, a fixed count from creation. This is important. The week, the Shabbat, is not under the control of the sun, the moon, the stars, the galaxy, the cosmos. None of those control the Shabbat cycle. Shabbat is an independent fixed count of 1 to 7 back to 1, commemorating creation week. So Therefore, that which was created cannot rule over that which is outside of it. Really important to understand that. Okay? So, let's stay on this term for seasons, because they get broken down in Genesis 8:22. As long as the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, right? Zerah v'ketzir, v'kor v'cham. Winter and summer, right? V'kayitz v'cheref. Day and night shall not cease. Genesis 8, verse 22. So the actual order of things is that the stars and the sun determine the start of the spring harvest. This is followed by the sun counting the days from sunset to sunset in synchronization with the cycles of the moon that match a particular season, say barley in this case, to its feast, which would be Pesach, Feast of Unleavened Bread. Then when 12 lunar cycles are completed, 12 being the number for government, or Israel, 12 tribes, the year waits for its final signs that it is ended, and then the next year's season is set, and the days will begin their count all over again. Step 3 is what I call the two-witness rule. Numbers 35, verse 30, Deuteronomy 17, 6-7, and 19, verse 15 all say that 2 witnesses are required to establish every fact in Torah law. This is especially true of matters of life and death. Additionally, Deuteronomy 30, verse 19 has Moshe tell us that the heavens and the earth are also witnesses that will determine if Israel lives or dies. So therefore, if this is true when a person dies, the two-witness rule, it is also true when a heavenly or earthly cycle of time comes to an end. You need 2 witnesses to confirm the death of the old and the birth of the new. So here's how it works. The day is said to die under the witnesses of sunset and darkness. People might argue about exactly when they saw the sun set, but you can't argue when there's no light. It's darkness. Your day is over. Tradition will add 3 twilight stars are also used for this purpose, for Shabbat and for Yom Kippur. But I just like to say sunset and darkness because there's no arguing out of darkness. Okay? Now, because a week is simply a group of 7 days, the week dies when we get sunset and darkness on a Saturday. That's it. For the moon and the month, though, we get 4 witnesses for the death. People forget about this first one. The last sliver of the old crescent, the old moon. All the attention is on that new crescent. If you're going to tell me that's a sign, so must the end of that ending crescent also be a sign. Or you've got a double standard, right? Either both or none, right? So you get the last sliver of the old crescent, then you get darkness. The moon is not seen. Yes, not seeing something is a sign, okay? If it's 28 days or 29 days and the moon's not there when you expect it to be, it's gone into conjunction, and that is a sign. 3 is whatever day the conjunction falls on, whether it falls when the day is young, you get 10 hours left in the day, or 10 minutes left in the day. That day is the end of the month. So then sunset will end that month because every Hebrew day must end at sunset. And 4, the waxing crescent of the new moon, that last sign tells us the month has already started. It is not the sign that it just started. It may be, but it's not that all the time. When you see the crescent at evening, whether it's evening 29 or evening 30, doesn't matter. It will either tell you that the month has just begun because the conjunction happened, or it will tell you that it began 1 or 2 nights earlier. That crescent can even be 3 nights early, 3 nights late. Since your lunar month is only 30 days long, a crescent that you don't see until the 3rd night, that's not a new moon. It's a 10% old moon. Simple math, guys. We'll get into those references with Isaiah, I believe, that defines new as dark, having not sprung forth. We'll get into that later. For the year, well, a lot of people don't know this. This might come as a surprise to some of you. The year also ends in darkness. Why? Because the last Hebrew month, Adar, and it doesn't matter if you have only the first Adar or both months Adar. If you have an extra lunar leap month, that's also called Adar. In either case, the last month means darkness, eclipse in ancient Canaanite. Right? So the year will always, in a grammatical sense, because the month is named darkness, will end in darkness. Whether that's month 12 or month 13, doesn't matter. Right? Then you will wait for the signs of vernal equinox. And there are manifold signs that you can look for. A lot of them are involving the stars, which is hinted at in Job. Pleiades Cluster, we'll get to that another time. Well, just not at this particular section point, but actually it's coming up. Certain stars that rise and set a particular way will determine that spring has arrived. These stars are mentioned in the scripture. Again, the Pleiades Cluster is in Job and in Amos, because when that group of stars set in the afternoon was not seen the next night, spring was near. You might see the Pleiades Cluster. It's like an arrow coming up. Very easy to spot. Okay? You see that arrow come up, and you might see it come up at, say, 8 o'clock. Then as the winter drags on, it might be 7:30. Then it might be 6:30. And by the time you get to the middle of March, the Pleiades is setting so early that it sets before the sun does. It sets in the afternoon. The sun goes down 1 to 2 hours later. No arrow in the sky. Right? A lot of ancients compared its appearance to a shovel. So if you're an ancient astronomer and you see that the Pleiades is going lower and lower and lower, and now finally you don't see it, it means the shovel has gone into the earth. It's time to plant. And that is how dozens and dozens of ancient cultures used the stars to tell them when to plant. So if Israel doesn't know this, they are the dumbest people in the history of the Middle East. Now, thing is, another aspect of the witness of darkness that I should mention, and this comes from Deuteronomy 4. Therefore diligently guard yourselves, for you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb in the midst of the fire, lest you should do corruptly, and shall make for yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of a male or a female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, or the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the heavens, the likeness of any creature that creeps on the ground, or the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And lest you lift up your eyes to the heavens and shall see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the hosts of heaven, and you are drawn away into bowing down and serving them. That's the key point. Which Yahweh your Elohim is allotted to all the peoples under the heavens. So pagan nations, this is Deuteronomy 4:15 through 19, pagan nations literally all around Israel turned to the sun, moon, and stars and turned them into gods, enraging Father Yah. This includes the Egyptians, who began their day at sunrise and made the sun a god in the process. For these reasons, Father Yah did not want to have any of his time cycles glorify the sun, moon, or the stars. So they all start and end when the cosmos gets out of the way and doesn't compete with Father Yah for glory. Genesis 1 verse 5 says, and it was evening and it was morning one day, meaning that our current 24-hour day is designed to have evening first and then morning. So the following evening starts the next day. There are many more proofs of this concept, such as Deuteronomy 21:22 through 23, 24:10 through 15, Joshua 8:29, Judges 19:8 through 10, and so on, as we like to say. So if the day ends at sunset, it follows naturally that the week, which is merely 7 days, as I said, has a Shabbat begin and end at sunset. And not only does the month end in darkness, but so does the year. So that's step 3. Step 4 is understanding how the moon is required to synchronize with the sun, to obey the sun. The 2 most important regulations in the eternal Torah calendar are 1, that the Hebrew lunar month starts sunset after lunar conjunction, and 2, that the new moon, which is the dark moon at lunar conjunction, that is nearest the start of spring at vernal equinox, is always Abib, or Nisan, the first agricultural month. The question is, how do we know this is the case? Here are some helpful steps to seeing why these rules must be true. Okay? 1, if we accept the idea that a waxing crescent is some form of a sign attached to the start of a lunar month, then the waning crescent or last sliver of the old month must also be a sign. 2, when the moon can't be seen, i.e. because it has gone into conjunction, this is between signs, followed by the sign of sunset that ends that day. Since all Hebrew days must end at sunset, the last day of the month, conjunction day, is no different. That last day that is marked by conjunction ends at sunset. That is after that point. Now, please understand, since about the year 3100 BCE, roughly, the ancient Egyptians could predict a new moon in a 25-year window of time with perfect accuracy and reckoned it by observation between old and new crescents, calling the start of their lunar month the day of invisibility. That is conjunction day, okay? By the time Moshe is reared as a prince of Egypt, the nation that has more than a millennia and a half to perfect both their observational techniques and the math behind them, the observations. Since Moshe was schooled in all the wisdom of Egyptians, that's St. Stephen, Acts 7:22, he had to have this knowledge about the lunar conjunction because the Egyptians had it. Psalm 81 verse 3 also defines the new moon as kisei, a word that in hundreds of places means only to shroud, conceal, darken, and so on. So it matters that this is the time when we blow the shofar at the start of the Hebrew month. The other meaning of kisei is appointed time. And guess what? The dark moon, the new moon, is also an appointed time, which explains that. But it never, ever can mean full moon, as there is another Hebrew word that for full moon, levanah, which means white. A full moon is all white. It's levanah. It's also where you get the term Lebanon, right? And Laban, Jacob's uncle. They're all from that root, okay? So the white moon is therefore the opposite of the kisei, the dark moon, right? The 2 most ancient Torah translations we have, one in Greek and one in Aramaic, will never translate Psalm 81:4 or 3, depending upon the version, as full moon. Never. It was not understood to be such in the ancient record. Okay? So as we move on from this point, sunset after conjunction as a rule is referenced in a few other places in Scripture. In Deuteronomy 33:14, we have the wording, the choice fruits of the sun with the choice fruits of the moon, which shows the linkage between the seasons the sun controls and the feast the moon counts towards. The word in Hebrew is yariach, moon, rather than the general term chodesh that can refer to either a solar or a lunar cycle. Yariach is only about the moon. Next one. Psalm 104 verse 19 says, Yahweh made the moon for the seasons, the sun knows the place of its setting. The Hebrew strongly implies the 2 parts of the sentence are connected. meaning the moon is going through the seasons because of the cycles of the sun going down and ending all the days, including that last day of the lunar month. The Peshet Aramaic version of the Psalms agrees and has the word "and" in the critical juncture. The moon for the seasons and the sun knows the time of its setting. I've got the Aramaic text below. You can take a look. You can see, you can't miss that vav, that "and," because it's supersized. Also, the most extensive treatment of this topic is in 1 Samuel chapter 20, where King Saul has a 2-day feast for the new moon. That's mentioned in 1 Samuel 20:27. And Saul is wondering where David is. But David arranged with Jonathan to be somewhere else at an annual sacrifice his family does at Bethlehem. While it is very likely this annual sacrifice was done either at the start of spring or the start of fall, we do not have enough information to identify which it is. Right? This leads to the conclusion that this was the normal procedure, regardless as to which month it is, to have a feast on the first 2 days of each month, because that's what the text is showing us. And it's often a 2-day process to go from sunset after conjunction to the sighting of the crescent is often 2 days. Okay? Because the crescent marks the last witness. It is the backwards marker for saying, yes, your month has started at some point in the past. That normal process of having the 2-day new moon cycle, you cannot have that against the laws of physics if you only begin from the sighting of the crescent. At the very least, you can't guarantee that will always be the case every month. But if the sunset is, after conjunction is the time marker, you will always have those 2 days. The other important lunar rule that the new moon nearest vernal equinox must be the first month of Abib is also based in Scripture. Abib, for example, is in one place connected to the time, it's called the time of the standing grain, which is Deuteronomy, it's chapter 16, verses 1 through 9. Genesis 8, verse 22 names the 4 seasons as seed time, which is fall, when you sow your barley seed for spring, right? Harvest, when you reap in spring what you sowed in fall, and then summer and winter. Step 6. The 4 rivers that connected to the Garden of Eden. So previously we talked about how flowing rivers are symbolic of the passing of or resetting of time, as was definitely the case with Joshua 4 containing the calendar code of the priests. When the priests stood with the Ark of the Covenant in the midst of the Jordan River, the river stopped flowing. When they took the Ark back on land, the Jordan resumed its normal course. The moments the priests were in the water was about their calendar time, while the moments they were on land saw the return of regular time. In Genesis 2, verse 10, however, we are told of one very small river that flows throughout the Garden of Eden, and from there it divides into 4 great rivers that the Scripture calls Pishon, Gihon, the Hiddekel, which is also in Greek is Tigris, and the Phrath, or the Euphrates. While there has been much speculation about where these rivers actually are today, the code I am talking about here does not require me to answer that specific question. Instead, I want to focus on what the 4 very massive rivers flowing hundreds or even thousands of miles compared to one very small stream that flows through Eden, what they represent. I believe the 4 large rivers are a complete circuit of time. That is to say, a year. While the 5th and much smaller river represents a leap day, needed at the end of every 4 years to keep the solar year running on time. In other words, each great river represents 365 days, while the little stream that waters Eden is that occasional February 29th that you get every 4th year. We'll get into why that I believe that. I'm just giving you the concept for now. But moving on for the moment to step 7, the harvest cycle of ancient Israel. One fairly common misconception in the Hebrew roots calendar community is the idea that you must always add a leap month if after 12 lunar months the vernal equinox hasn't happened yet. Such groups that practice this procedure claim they are properly using the vernal equinox, as I claim in the Eternal Torah calendar. But the reality is their procedure is unworkable. To see why, let's begin with some common assumptions that this school of thought offers. Misconception number 1. You must always add a leap month if the lunar year ends before vernal equinox to ensure there will always be barley available for Pesach and first fruits. Well, Deuteronomy 16:1 specifically says that the barley must be in its early stages of ripening, or what we call green ears. Green ears, Aviv. That's where the month comes from. As a result, it's not any kind of barley from the 2 months of harvest time, which ends at the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot. That will do. Only the early development that takes about 3 to 4 weeks to ripen across the totality of Israel. The time of the start of green ears is in the first week of March. That is why Abib cannot start after the first few days of April. That is simply restating in agricultural terms the rule for the new moon nearest vernal equinox must always be Abib. The timing of Pesach start is fixed. No earlier than vernal equinox, no later than April 20th. When the rabbinic calendar shifts significantly out of time enough that Pesach is starting much later than that, then part of Pesach will touch May, and that's going to be a serious problem. And it's a mathematical certainty, folks. Anyway, as a result, if the 12th Hebrew lunar month ends a few days before vernal equinox, say March 18th, by this school of thought, you're just going to add a full 30 days from March and start March 19th. Then you're going to need 2 more weeks to get to the Pesach feast, which remember is not at new moon, it's at full moon. And that will mean the barley you present at first fruits is going to be brown, coarse, and anything but ripe. Okay? And that's what it will be at the very end of April or early May. And that will throw off your entire year of harvesting. All of it. Misconception number 2. If the new moon nearest vernal equinox rule is applied, then you can have an early new moon half a year later that is not at the time when the grape harvest is concluded. So here's the thing I want to say to that misconception. The Torah does not say that all produce must be harvested by the Feast of Sukkot. Only the major part of the first gleaning is brought at Sukkot. The remainder is left for the poor. Hello. Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not completely reap the corners of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. So not all the harvest goes. Do not glean your vineyard or gather every grape in your vineyard. Leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am Yahweh your Elohim. Similarly, the Torah also doesn't say, to go to the other end of the harvest season, that the barley has to be ripe at Abib new moon. You're assuming that. The Karaites assume that. But it's nowhere in the text. Okay? The barley can be completely in the bud, unripe, at Abib new moon. No problem. But it has to be ripe 2 weeks later. It has to be ripe 16 days later. 15 to 16 days later. Which is much more closer to full moon than new moon. And in a preview of the next topic, the remission of all debts is also said to begin at the end of the 7th year and at Sukkot. Why? Because this is when the overall tithing process is completed for the year. Deuteronomy 31:10. No tithing, therefore, is done from after Sukkot to before the next spring, before the next turn of the year. As we read in Exodus 34:23 through 24, 3 times in the year all your men are to appear before the Master, Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, for I dispossess the nations before you, and shall enlarge your borders. Let no one covet your land. When you go out to appear before Yahweh your Elohim 3 times in the year. The tithes are tied to the 3 occasions when all Israelite men must appear before Father Yah in Jerusalem. Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. Misconception number 3. Following the assertion of misconception number 2, the problem is you cannot tithe based on a partial or incomplete harvest because the total quantity of produce that will have to be gathered up is not known. So if you don't know what the final amount is, you can't give a tenth, is what they're saying. But you see, the reality is the feasts are actually the time of year that all tithes are brought in, including those with special timings if they apply, such as to the priest or the Levite. If it's the third year of a cycle, they get special tithes at that time. People forget about that. Therefore, the tithes are based on the majority harvest, which will exclude what gets stored in barns, and it will also exclude the portion that is left for the poor in the fields. And we see this again, Exodus 23:14 through 16. 3 times in the year you are to observe a festival to me. Guard the festival of unleavened bread. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the month of Abib. For in it you came out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt. Do not appear before me empty-handed. And at the festival of the harvest, the first fruits of your labors which you have sown in the field, and at the festival of the ingathering, which of course is Sukkot, at the outgoing, at the ending of the year. Right? And I got the Hebrew there to show you that. Right? When you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. So we see a few important details here. Again, we're just taking the Torah at its word. All of my calendar stuff is coming from what the Torah is telling me to do. Right? The appropriate tithes are brought to their intended feasts, is the first thing. Second, at the Feast of Ingathering, which is at the end of the year, Sukkot is the end of the agricultural season. That began with Pesach 7 months earlier. In Exodus 34:22, Sukkot is called the turn of the year because the year actually turns at the times of spring and fall equinox. But if you're looking for a hard end, that is given at Sukkot. So this is when the majority harvest and tithes that are attached to them, that's where they come from. The third point is this is the overall agricultural year that is given in greater detail in 2 places in Deuteronomy. Here's the first one. You shall tithe without fail all the yield of your grain that the field brings forth year by year. And you shall eat before Yahweh your Elohim in the place where he chooses to make his name dwell, the tithe of your grain and your new wine and your oil, the firstlings of your herds and your sheep, so that you learn to fear Yahweh your Elohim always. But when the way is too long for you, so you are not able to bring the tithe, or when the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to put his name is too far from you, when Yahweh your Elohim is blessing you, you shall give it in silver, and take the silver in your hand. Go to the place which Yahweh your Elohim has chooses. And you shall use the silver for whatever your soul desires, for cattle, for sheep, for wine, for strong drink, for whatever your soul desires. And you shall eat there before Yahweh your Elohim, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. And do not forsake the Levite who is within your gates, for he has no part nor inheritance with you. At the end of every 3rd year, you bring out all the tithe of your increase that year, and store it up within your gates. And the Levite, because he has no portion nor inheritance with you, and the sojourner, and the fatherless, and the widow who are within your gates, they shall come and eat and be satisfied, so that Yahweh your Elohim does bless you in all the work of your hand which you do. That's Deuteronomy 14:22 through 29. But the second reference is quite a bit shorter and is even more specific. And it shall be that unto the place which Yahweh your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell there, there you are to bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, your tithes, and the contributions of your hand, and all your choice offerings which you vow to Yahweh, and you will rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim. You and your sons and your daughters and your male servants and your female servants, and the Levite who is within your gates. Since he has no portion, neither portion nor inheritance with you, guard yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, except in the place which Yahweh chooses in one of your tribes. There you are to offer your burnt offerings, and there you are to do all that I command you. Deuteronomy 12:11 through 14. So the thing to take away from these details is these offerings are only made at what will become the Jerusalem temple, the place where Father Yah causes his name to dwell, and not offerings done in their home region. Also, the offerings that one is specifically commanded to rejoice in are those that happen at the three great feasts, not the normal sin, guilt, and other offerings that can be offered throughout the year. So in terms of all feasts, we are told, Deuteronomy 16:13 through 17, 3 times a year all your males appear before Yahweh your Elohim in the place which he chooses, at the festival of unleavened bread, at the festival of weeks, at the festival of booths, and none should appear before Yahweh empty-handed, but each one with the gift of his hand, according to the blessing of Yahweh your Elohim, which he has given you. That's 16:13 through 17. And here it is again. And now, see, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which you, O Yahweh, have given me. Then you shall place it before Yahweh your Elohim, and bow down before Yahweh your Elohim, and shall rejoice in all the good which Yahweh your Elohim has given to you, and your house, you and the Levite, and the stranger who is among you. And when you have completed tithing, all the tithe of your increase, in the 3rd year, which is the year of tithing, and you have given it to the Levite, to the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the widow, and they have eaten within your gates and been satisfied, then you shall say before Yahweh your Elohim, I have put away the set-apart portion from my house, and I have also given it to the Levite, to the stranger, and to the fatherless, and to the widow, according to all your command which you have commanded me. I have not transgressed your commands, nor have I forgotten. That's Deuteronomy 26:10 through 13. So that is the requirement of these processes at every feast. But to call them out specifically, for Shavuot, Deuteronomy 16:11, you shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim, you and your son and your daughter and your male servant and your female servant, and the Levite who is within your gates, and the stranger and the fatherless and the widow who are in your midst, at the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell. So that's about Shavuot. For Sukkot, Leviticus 23:40, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of the good trees, the branches, the palm trees, the twigs of leafy trees, and the willows of the scripture. You shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim for 7 days. There it is again, right? That's Leviticus 23, verse 40. Perform the festival of booths for 7 days. At the ingathering from your threshing floor, from your winepress, you shall rejoice in your festival. You, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, the Levite, the stranger, fatherless, and the widow who are within your gates. For 7 days you shall observe a festival to Yahweh your Elohim in the place which Yahweh chooses, because Yahweh your Elohim does bless you in all your increase, in the work of your hands, and you shall be only rejoicing. Deuteronomy 16:13 through 15. Bottom line with all of this stuff is that throughout the agricultural year that starts with the barley, right, which is Pesach, and ends with the grapes, which is Sukkot, right? Produce at each important feast goes to one of 3 places, okay? If it is not stored or brought for the majority harvest at the right feast, it is either left in the fields, and therefore the poor get it. The Torah also is deliberately vague as to how much of a field or vineyard is left over for the poor. That is left to the imagination of the person to figure out. And the idea, I think, is they're going to be more than generous because the precise amount isn't given. So they're going to give a lot to be above reproach, right? As such, tithe, the word tithe, does not strictly mean tenth. It often can simply mean a portion or a remnant, as it does here. So the idea that you must have the total produce amount from which you will deduct precisely 10%, this is unscriptural. This is an error, right? You need to understand that. There's many examples of how a tithe was more than 10%. I already referenced the widow at the temple gave all that she had. So that all that she had, more than 10%. Annas and Shapira gave more than 10%, but still were in sin and died for that sin because they gave less than what they promised it would be. They promised the total proceeds of a real estate sale. They thought it was going to be one thing. It turned out to be a bit more. They held the difference back. They carried them out by their feet and buried them. Okay? The misconception number 4. Modern calculations prove extremely late starts to feast seasons did happen in ancient Israel. No. Wrong. Modern attempts to suggest, for example, that the 25th of Elul could have happened as late as October 2nd, which is when dating something that Nehemiah does, his famous completion of the wall in 445 BCE. These are very late and they are spurious for several reasons. One of the very best rabbinic calculators on the web, which also converts between Julian and Gregorian systems, is called Formulab. They accurately calculate that in 445 BCE, October 2nd Julian, which is actually September 27th Gregorian, was the end of Tishri, right? The 27th day of Tishri, not the end of Elul. So it's more than a month off, right? In which, in this case, agree the Eternal Torah calendar on when Abib 1 was in that year, Gregorian March 8th. Having said that, rabbinic rules were not fixed in the form that we recognize them today until the Middle Ages, and not in Yeshua's time, let alone in Nehemiah's day, some half a millennium earlier. It just so happens that in this case, the modern rabbinic processes come to the same moment in time that the Eternal Torah calendar designates. The bottom line is the 25th day of the 6th month of Elul can never, ever happen as late as October 2nd, because that brings one Tishri to October 7th and Sukkot beginning October 22nd, which is way too late. Your grapes will be gone by the time you're supposed to bring them. Okay? You cannot have Sukkot starting at the end of October. Sorry. Just like you can't have Pesach touch May at the start of the harvest. Okay? In other cases, historical reconstructions do not even discuss what their calendar conventions or assumptions are. And I have found those cases in those cases no consistent process or verifiable rules that I can track through time from either scripture or tradition. Without a full vetting of those processes, the reader is simply left to take such a person at their word alone, as opposed to the Eternal Torah calendar, which uses scripture for its processes for all to see, openly, transparently, and universally. Step number 8, we're called the Enoch Coder. Getting back to the calendar patterns related to Enoch, he was taken up to heaven after he completed 365 years, but before he could complete his 366th year, which is a perfect metaphor for the solar year, always fully completing day 365, but stopping somewhere short on day 366. Obviously, the codes, of Adam, who lived in Eden, passed them on to Enoch, and his descendants were clarified before Enoch was taken up to heaven. In the same way, Enoch's son Methuselah confirms the 365 years of Enoch's life is a solar code. Methuselah is 187 years old when he has his son Lamech. It is 187 days exactly from the start of spring to the start of fall, including the first day in the count as day 1. In other words, vernal equinox day must be included as the first bookend, with the day of the fall equinox as the other one, like two dots connecting a line of 187 days. In the counting of the days in the 360-year process, but it's in the counting of the days that the 360-day year is born. Eden is designated as a circle with two special trees in the center of the circle. Eden opens at the east, the direction of the rising sun, has circles of both water, which is its river, and fire, the cherubim's flaming swords, within its heart. The circle then has 360 degrees And in this paradigm, the degrees equal 360 days. Just like in other situations, cubits equal days. Right? When the last day is done, the procedure would be to look for a sign that shows the next spring has happened. This would be when the Enoch math would dictate at least another 5 days be added to that year to match the 365 years that Enoch was on the earth. The Eden River would then be after the 4 larger rivers had finished flowing, finished counting their 365-day years each. But there are no months yet of any kind in Enoch's day, whether solar or lunar. They do not exist. The 364 count also begins with the revelation of Enoch. Again, we have the overall structure of the 4 rivers, the 365 years that Enoch was on the earth, revealing the 365 whole days for the year. This time, however, the code is with Enoch's grandson, Lamech. Lamech lives 182 years. 182 is exactly half of 364. What's more, they divide evenly 364 into 52 weeks, 7 days. So this will become the Shabbat calculator for the priests. Okay? And the other thing to understand is that Noah was around for a very long time, 950 years. Okay? So he's older than Adam, but doesn't quite make it as well as Methuselah does. Okay? Now, the thing that happens is that when Moshe says that it's 150 days from the start of the flood to when the ark rests on the mountains of Ararat. And he says that the start of that count and the end of the count are on the 17th day of their respective months. Flood starts in month 2, day 17. And the ark rests on Ararat month 7, right? Month 7, day 17. The problem is you cannot have a lunar calendar where you would have 5 consecutive 30-day months in a row. However, it is remotely possible, like once every 1,000 years. And yes, I admit, my calculations for 2023 revealed that it was possible to have 5 30-day months in this year if you count by universal time and not over Jerusalem. But this is very, very rare, and like once in 1,000 years rare. And so if you're going to say that that the flood month or the year of the flood had this extremely rare anomaly going on, I would think that Moshe would have mentioned it. He would have known that it was an extremely rare anomaly. As it is, the only way you get 5 30-day months in a row is on a solar calendar, which will work all the time. And Noah actually had 2 calendars. Okay? He had one that he used before the flood. And then after the flood, when it said that after the flood, we are told in Genesis 8:22, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, day and night, summer and winter will not cease. That's when Noah will have a remembrance day for spring and fall equinoxes and for the summer and winter solstices, which will expand it to 364. Then you simply have to count by different methods for both systems to align with the longer solar year of 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 45 seconds, which is what it is now. So if you want to go deeper into this, I'm not going to read this, but I have the chart available that explains in detail the different balancing mechanisms for the 360 count and for the 364 count. The bottom line for our purposes is that the math in both of these calendars is based on units of 40 years, 400 years, and 4,000 years. A 40-year count is called a generation. A 400-year count is called a biblical era. and a 4,000 year count is a biblical age. And what I want to leave you guys with is this idea, okay, that every event that takes place across the 66 books of our Bible, from the creation of Adam to the death of John on Patmos as he finishes writing Revelation, is not just around 4,000 years. It's exactly 4,000 years. That's what the math revealed. That you can either look at the totality of all the events in the Bible as happening over 140-year generations, or 10 400-year eras. But no more and no less than 4,000 years from the first biblical witness to the last biblical witness. So if you want to find out more information about how that works, I've got the chart for you here. But the bottom line is this. Father Yah is always on time. Father Yah his math is perfect, his rules are perfect, his procedures are perfect. Okay? And if you want to find out more about it, we have a lot of information in the Eternal Torah Calendar documents about how it works. And we have specialized teachings all over the site about how the calendar works to one degree or another. But the point I'm trying to make is that Father Yah is able to be 100% on time through the rules that he has given in the scripture. And in fact, almost every single calendar rule that I am aware of currently comes from the earliest part of the scripture. And wherever the Hebrew people have gone, before the second temple was destroyed and then they went out of exile and they forgot some of these things, unfortunately, which is another story, there's always been a learned elite that traveled with them that knew that they could look at the scripture and find out exactly how to keep time. So that's what I really wanted to share for you, with you. I'm Andrew Gabriel Roth, and that is your Torah Thought for the week. Next week, 2023 Pesach special. Then the regular Parsha with Shemini will be the following week. Hag Sameach. Hope you all have a wonderful feast, and we'll talk again soon. Shalom.